Hey folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things, and in honor of the new Minion movie, I made a few minions of my own with their own little twist. And I'm sorry. Now, first thing first, I've opened a fresh and delicious package of clay and cut it into 3 unequal lumps that will eventually become my 3 little minions. I'll start by making Kevin first since he's the biggest of the 3, so I can dick around with the details on a slightly larger scale before moving on to the smaller versions. And before anyone asks, did I know their names before I started recording this video? Of course I did. I'm a huge Minion fan. I mean, you don't think I'd pick a topic for this week based solely on its popularity in the media rather than my actual understanding or interest in something, do you? Because that would be disingenuous, and that is not what I'm about. Anyways, at this point I've given Kevin his trademark whale shark mouth and oversized horrifying monster gums before cutting away the skin around his cheeks so that I can add some dangly bits of skin that are barely keeping the top and bottom sections of his mouth attached. I'll add some gnarly textures using a variety of ball styluses to give me some nice natural and organic looking cheek holes before getting to work making him a big chunky tongue. This of course gets stuck into his mouth as most tongues do, and I can get to work on pre-baking a triple set of big beautiful teeth. To make the teeth, I'll make a teeny tiny ball of clay and then squish, squeeze, poke and prod it until it's kinda toothy, then repeat this process ad nauseum until I've got a whole platter of teeth. Then I'll bake these chiclets in the oven to harden them before carefully inserting them into Kevin's gums. Kevin has what dentists like to call summer teeth because some are here and some are there and some are even missing. So with his seasonal smile in place, I'll help gummy up his gums a little bit more before building up a bit of wrinkle above and below his lips. A big friendly smile like that is gonna displace a lot of skin, so I figured it would behoove me to go a bit heavy-handed with the wrinkles here. Otherwise his mouth is mostly finished, which means I need to make him some goggles. I'll start by taking an appropriately sized circle cutting tube and then wrapping it in clay before cutting off all the excess and then dividing it down the middle. These will end up being Kevin's goggles, but while I'm at it, I also made some appropriately lensed versions for both Bob and Stuart. Once the goggles have been baked in the oven and they're cooled down, I can carefully remove them from the tube and then sand them down so they're nice and flat. I'll also sand down the sides so that I can glue them together. Then I'll add some flat wormy dealies around the rims before adding some more teeny tiny screws around the edge. Then the goggles can get carefully pressed into place on Kevin's face, and I can build up the skin around the goggles by adding various wormy dealies and blending them in. I figured since they seem to wear these goggles for so long that they'd probably start to fuse with the skin anyways, again I'm gonna go pretty ham with the wrinkles here to give the appearance of the goggles being pretty well embedded in Kevin's face. Finally, I'll add a few more choice wrinkles around the mouth for extra something, I guess, before applying a bit of gentle wrinkle texture with my clay shapers, then tossing him in the oven for his first bake. Now once he's out and cooled down, I can give him some proper skin texture. Now this is my nitrile glove and it's got exactly the texture I want. I'll cover every inch of Kevin's skin with a thin layer of bacon ball and then aggressively dab the tip of my nitrile finger over the top, which leaves me with a pretty awesome porous texture. Then all I need to do is bake the glue to harden it, and that's it. Then it's on to giving him some eyeballs. I've rolled a couple equally sized balls of clay that will not quite fill the lenses of his goggles, then I can smooth them down, round them out, and add some half-lidded lids. And that's pretty much it, which means it's time to get to work on his limbs. I'll start by drilling 4 holes around his body, then jamming a couple wires up into his undercarriage. Then once I've got him mounted on a block of wood, I can run a single wound cable through his body and out the other side. Now Kevin's wearing a pretty bog standard pair of black work shoes, so there's not a lot of detail to be concerned with down south, so once they've been bulked out, I can start building up his trousers by squishing clay around his little legs and smoothing it upwards to his torso. Then I'll cut a center line to turn his Skorts into Jorts, then wrap a long flat wormy dealie around his belly. Now I'll add some little rectangles for the front and back of his overalls, then blend them all in before cutting teeny tiny pockets. Now I'll use this little piece of fabric to press some texture into his trousers before going around the edge of his pants to add a little bit of detail, and then adding a trio of adorable little pockets. Next, I can cut the bones of his arms to length, wrap them in clay, bend them into place, then finally add the straps of his overalls. These get the same texturing as the rest of his trousers, then I'll add some little buttonholes covered by little buttons. Finally, to finalize his goggles, I'll wrap another flat strap around his head, then add a couple little connectors between the straps and the goggles. Then the only thing left to do is make him some hands. Now his hands start out as little balls that get squished and twisted until I've got a trifecta of fingers, then I'll stick them onto the stumps of his arms, blend them into the forearm, then finally wrap it up in a little blob of clay. Then it's into the oven for his final bake, and Kevin is finished. And if I don't say so myself, he's looking pretty smart, which means he's ready to join the other two who are already finished and waiting for a pre-paint primer. Now the other two followed an almost identical build process, except one of my patrons said I should leave their goggles empty and just have black pits, so I figured I could do that with Bob, and Stuart is just a Cyclops that I thought should be rocking double Fonzie finger guns. However, before I get to any painting, I need to prime them white. The white primer is particularly important because they're mostly yellow, and yellow is a real pain in the ass to paint with if you don't properly prepare your paints prior to the painting process. However, because I primed it in advance and I'm using brilliantly pigmented paints, I managed to get the base coat yellow in a single pass. Of course, it helps that I'm going to be working my way through a whole slew of slightly darker yellows to add recessed shading between the folds and around the edges, before finally ending with a full once-over of a lighter glaze to tie all those colors together. To paint the gums and give them a gnarly, multicolored, fleshy look, I'll start with a thin red wash, followed by a few more coats until I've built up a nice base. Then I'll add some deeper terracotta over the top, followed by a darker purple, before adding some surface highlights with a nice light purple. I'll repaint all the teeth with a not quite white base coat, then work my way through a series of progressively lighter khaki and bone colors, wet blending the paints from the bottom of the tooth upwards to give me a nice smooth transition between the shades. Then his overalls get a dark blue base coat, repeating as necessary until I've got a nice uniform blue. Once that's dried, I'll haphazardly repaint the entire surface using a very thin, lighter shade, allowing that to dry as well before dry brushing with a much lighter shade of the same blue. Finally, strategically added nearly white blues will give me all the fraying around my edges. His shoes and gloves will get a once-over with a basic flat black, then his goggle straps get the same black followed by a slightly lighter edge highlight. Now up until this point, much like the sculpting, all three minions have followed pretty much the same process, but it's their eyes that really set them apart. Now Kevin is going to get the source material brown iris and black pupils, while Bob gets a not at all unsettling pair of black pits, and Stuart I thought would look pretty smart with one single massive white cataracty eyeball. I'll paint the frames of the goggles with a metallic silver, and then once that's dried, I'll use a nice black wash around the rims to really highlight the little screws. Now to make the lenses for Kevin's goggles, I'll refill the remainder of his goggles with UV resin, then make sure it's nice and flat before curing it, and doing the exact same thing for Stuart. Now Bob, on the other hand, I wanted to retain the empty pits, and maybe tell a little story as well, so I'm going to give him some broken lenses made out of thin plastic packaging, which I'll measure using the original goggle tubes, then I'll cut out using some teeny tiny scissors. I'm also going to cut away little pieces until it looks like jagged broken glass, then I can carefully glue them in place. give everyone's gums a little shine, I'll coat the surface in some high gloss varnish, then get to work on the final piece of the puzzle. Kevin and Stuart have beautiful flowing black locks, which I made out of some thin black sewing thread. Now, I decided not to build a base because now that I'm done with these things, I want them out of my house. That being said, if you'd like a, thankfully, one-of-a-kind minion to call your own, then leave me a comment down below saying which one is your favorite. Next week, I'll pick a winner for each of the minions, then send them off to you when I eventually build up the nerve to leave my house and go to the post office. Otherwise, with the hair in place, we are all but done here, and on to the glamour shots. As always, a massive thank you to the fine folk of Patreon that continue to support this channel despite its many crimes against humanity. And a very special thank you to my newest patrons, Kaz Stallion, Q aka Kirstine, Paige Coate, Louis Hennessy, Antonio Rosales, Chlorophyll, Tankski, Darian Garcia Gutierrez, JQ Welch, Nenny, Catherine Lane, Severin the Panda, Olivia Corlew, Daniel Lamson, Lucifer, Lizzie Valentine, Jenna Avery, Void, and Megan Haley E. You are the big beautiful summer teeth that fill this horrifying smile of a channel. Don't forget to let me know down below which of these handsome fellas you'd like adorning your shelves at home, and if you like this video, then consider smashing and subscribe to that like button. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.